Were given unprecedented access to the shroud for 5 intensive days. Over the next several years, this tireless group, known as the Shroud of Turin Research Project, or STURP for short, which was comprised of many of the world's premier scientists representing such diverse disciplines as physics, chemistry, engineering, forensic medicine, and many others, spent no less than 150,000 man-hours studying, testing, and interpreting the data. The results seem to indicate the shroud could be a genuine first-century burial cloth from somewhere in Palestine. But then, in 1988, carbon dating analysis by 3 different testing laboratories produced quite a different result.
The radiocarbon dates that we obtained clearly put the shroud in the Middle Ages.
According to the carbon-14 tests, the shroud came into existence somewhere between the years 1260 and 1390. Could all the other scientists be wrong? First of all, we must point out that the dating of a shroud sample in 1988 was both controversial and hotly disputed by experts in many fields.
The problem of dating a cloth, not only the shroud, but I think any cloth, any old cloth, is not easy to solve completely and definitely.
According to the professor, the idea of a medieval origin of the shroud leads to an impossible thesis. The forger would have had to find a man to crucify, flog him mercilessly, place him in a shroud, and then manufacture or simply wait for the image to somehow appear.
I think that is quite impossible, that what we cannot do today, it was very easy and during a medieval period.
150,000 man-hours and the work of dozens of scientific disciplines were challenged, actually brushed aside, by a single carbon-14 test. But the world was left with the same question. What created the image? And how do all of these latest scientific advances lead us to this particular artifact? What is there about the image that causes scientists to put their reputations and fortunes at risk?
The resurrection itself belongs to the spiritual world, and I don't think it is the business of physics to talk about it. However, the shroud itself and what made the image leads us to a mysterious gate which opens for us, and it lets us to see a completely different world, an extraordinary world with extraordinary laws.
What are those laws? And do they exist regardless of the age of the fabric? Is this purely a scientific squabble? Or could it be there is something here that is far more important than the artifact itself? Is it possible that the energy and information now being detected is actually the information we need to help us overcome the problems we face today? Are the secrets of the universe, perhaps of all creation, locked up in this seemingly ordinary linen burial cloth? Can the image, now known to contain 3-dimensional information, also be a quantum hologram? Perhaps we should take a moment and define exactly what the Shroud of Turin is, and what makes it so special in the minds of so many people. The shroud is an ordinary piece of hand-woven fabric that measures 14 feet 3 inches long and 3 feet 7 inches wide. These full-length dark lines are scorches from the fire that nearly destroyed it in 1532. The diamond-shaped patches cover holes resulting from that fire. But it is the faint, ghostly image of a crucified man on the surface of the cloth that rivets our attention and makes this piece of cloth unique in all the world. What is the truth about the shroud? Is it a communication from another time, another dimension? And if so, can we determine what the message is intended to be? Could it be that the quantum revolution in physics permits science to go beyond human speculation? According to some physicists, the world is even more extraordinary than we thought. Oddly enough, this ordinary piece of linen cloth that many scientists believe to be over 2,000 years old might give scientists their most tangible clue to unlocking the secrets of the quantum hologram. Yet some still maintain the carbon-14 test places its scientific value under a cloud of suspicion.
There are hundreds of pieces of evidence, both scientific and historical, that indicate that the shroud is authentic. There's only one piece of evidence that says the shroud is not authentic, and that's carbon-14. However, carbon-14 has itself been much disputed. It is neither logical, empirical, or scientific to take one piece of evidence and ignore the hundreds of pieces of evidence in support of authenticity.
We are faced with a paradox here. All of the scientific analysis seems to place the cloth in Jerusalem in the 1st century, but the carbon-14 test makes the shroud unequivocally a 13th century relic. What if both analyses are correct? But how could the carbon-14 tests be as accurate as modern technology can make them, and all of the other scientific data that places the cloth solidly in the 1st century also be accurate? That possibility was suggested at the Sindone 2000 Worldwide Congress in Oviedo, Italy. Authors M. Sue Benford and Joseph Moreno posited the notion that a 16th century invisible patch had skewed the 1988 carbon-14 test on the sample taken from the Shroud of Turin. Their idea was backed by what seemed to be solid historical research, but the whole notion was immediately rejected as being technically impossible. At this point, another scientist, one of the original Stirp team, became interested. Like others who had closely examined the shroud, he too was very skeptical of the whole idea of reweaving. The late Raymond Rogers set himself the task of discovering whether or not scientific analysis could resolve the issue once and for all. Rogers obtained samples of the shroud immediately adjacent to the area used in the carbon-14 test. These were provided by Gilbert Reyes, the man who had originally removed them. In an interview unveiled at the 2005 Dallas Symposium on the Shroud, Rogers told the interviewer,
"This is just about the last straw. I've got the samples that can shoot that full of holes." So I got out the Ross samples and I got out some of the shroud samples, and I went to work again. And lo and behold, in less than an hour, I knew that the Ross sample was totally different in chemical composition than the main part of the shroud. And then the shocker that really shook me up, in looking at the Ross threads, I hit this one that was an end-to-end splice. And that's exactly the sort of thing that Benford and Moreno were talking about in this invisible reweaving.
After coming to this conclusion, Ray called me one day and said flat out, "Tom, there is no scientific wiggle room."
Up to this point, then, we can say with some degree of scientific certainty that the shroud is an authentic 1st century fabric. Some scientists may continue to disagree, but for the moment at least, the 1988 carbon-14 tests on the shroud appear to have been invalidated. In the meantime, a group of digital scientists in Amsterdam focused their expertise on a different set of data from the shroud. What they found stunned them all.
Holographic information is encoded in the shroud in an interference pattern. And most probably there's more information in it, which I call like a blueprint of the universe. Maybe an opening to a new science. You come in an unknown land. You don't have a GPS, you don't have a map. It's completely new. You have to reinvent science. And I think that is one of the things that the shroud is all about.
But even if we are to accept the shroud as a genuine 1st century fabric, that's only one piece of the puzzle. Validating the age of the fabric is important, but the work being done in Holland promises even more exciting revelations. If the fabric has been proven to be a genuine 1st century material, could it be there is supporting evidence to suggest this very fabric might in fact be the actual burial shroud of Jesus Christ? Have these scientists discovered something in the image itself that places this piece of cloth in a tomb near Golgotha? Which brings us to the next and so far unanswered question. How did the image get there? There can be no doubt that the Shroud of Turin has been venerated for hundreds of years by the faithful as the cloth or sheet that covered the body of the crucified Christ. Nor can there be any doubt that the shroud exists. It has been touched, handled, photographed, and examined in every way imaginable. But has the result of all the research, testing, and study brought us any closer to proving not only the age of the fabric, but the reason for its veneration? There are those who insist the authenticity of the shroud has not been proven. What's more, they contend the idea that it once wrapped the crucified body of the historic Jesus can indeed never be proven. Recently, others have challenged that assumption, and the search for historic and scientific evidence that might corroborate the authenticity of the shroud goes on. And even Cardinal Severino Paletto, the papal custodian of the Holy Shroud at the cathedral in Turin, finds the search fascinating.
My
attitude towards science is one of great respect, and scientists, many scientists in the world, study the shroud and carry